Hello and welcome to this Solidarity Conference in support of striking oil workers in Iran, a magnificent strike that has been going on for nearly 3 months by tens of thousands of oil workers in Iran in support of their demands against the slave-like conditions that the employers have been imposing on them, the state, the Islamic Republic in Iran, and the contractors that have been imposing on them. This evening, we are going to have a great lineup of speakers and video messages to give our support and show our solidarity with this tremendous and magnificent struggle that is going on in Iran. And we will also highlight some of the other struggles that are going on in Iran for social justice and for freedom in Iran. Before I start with a introduction, I would like just to go through some of the speakers that we have, a lineup of speakers that we have. We will hear from Shehla Dانشفر, spokesperson for Freedom Now, campaign to free jailed workers in Iran, and one of the organizers of this conference. We'll hear from John Clark, a Packer visitor in social justice at York University, Canada, and formerly organizer of Ontario Coalition Against Poverty. We'll also hear from Stephanie Smith by video message. She's the president of British Columbia General Employees Union, BCGU. We'll have Peter Tatchell, director of Peter Tatchell Foundation. We will have Kaaظم نیکخواه, head of international relations of Freedom Now, campaign to free jailed workers in Iran, also one of the organizers of this conference. We'll hear from Eric Lee, the founding editor of Labour Start. We'll have Sa'id Na'ma, president, the General Federation of Trade Unions and Employees of Iraq. We'll have Samir Nouri, spokesperson, Organization for the Abolition of the Death Penalty in Iraq. We'll have a video message by Joseph Dyer, Swiss-Syrian socialist activist, academic, and author. Then we'll have Shiva Mahboubi, spokesperson for the Campaign to Free Political Prisoners in Iran, CFPPI. Then we'll have Tamiz Sadeghi, member of the International Solidarity Committee of QP, British Columbia. And then we have Masoud Arjan, chairperson of Local 803, Community Health Services, BCGU. And then finally, we'll have a video message by Hassan Salehi. He's the spokesperson for the International Committee Against Executions. Before we start the first speaker, we'll have a statement read out in English and Farsi, statement of solidarity with the oil workers in Iran. But before that, I just wanted to say a few words in Farsi for our Farsi-speaking audience in Iran. میخوام از طرف سازمان دهندگان این کنفرانس، نهاد فریدم ناو، کمپین برای آزادی کارگران زندانی، به شما همه بینندگان گرامی خوش آمد بگم. این کنفرانس هست در حمایت از کارگران صنعت نفت که به طور قهرمانانه نزدیک به 3 ماهه که جنگیدن برای خواستایشون علیه شرایط برده‌واری که جمهوری اسلامی و پیمانکاران بر اونا حاکم کردن. در این کنفرانس همچنین به تمام جنبش‌های حق طلبانه، اعتراضات حق طلبانه و آزادی خواهان هم به اونا خواهیم پرداخت. و ما حدود 13 سخنران در این کنفرانس داریم و در میانش کلیپ هایی از اعتراضات کارگری در ایران و اعتراضات اجتماعی در ایران پخش خواهیم کرد. خیلی خوش آمد میگم به همتون. So we will have the statement by the in support of in solidarity with the striking oil workers read out first in Farsi by Masoud Arjan. And Masoud, please read out the statement, and then we will have it read out in English by Tamiz Sadeghi. Masoud, mic is yours.
Thanks, Bahram. I think I have to read the English one, so I start with the English. Is that okay? All right, thank you.
That's fine.
All right, thank you. Islamic regime of Iran should be expelled from the International Labour Organization and boycotted globally. we support striking oil workers in Iran. We have learned that tens of thousands of contract oil workers in more than 105 oil fields are on the strike, demanding higher wages, 20 working days and 10 days off each month, safe working environment, and the raising of living standards, as well as better food in camps, all of which are very substandard and unbearable. We also learned that one of the government's attempts is to set up Islamic councils to tighten its control over workers. And the workers oppose this and insist on the right to form their own real organizations and the right to assemble and protest. On the other hand, the contractors are trying to counter the extensive strike of oil workers by firing the day laborers and withholding the workers' unpaid wages. The striking oil workers in return demand the dismissing of contractors and return of all fired workers to the workplaces. An important step by the striking oil workers is the formation of protesting workers organizing councils, which has an effective coordinating role in this strike. Now, after 25 days, the risk of financial pressure as well as more layoff of these workers is threatening. We, the signatory of this letter, thanks Freedom Now for informing us of the news of significant and widespread strikes of the oil workers and their difficult situation in these struggles, and express our firm support for the struggle and the demands of tens of thousands taking part in this strike. The right to organize, to strike, and to protect their basic rights of all workers. We condemn the continued violation of these basic rights by the Islamic regime of Iran and demand the immediate and unconditional release of all jailed workers, teachers, and political prisoners in Iran. We know that the Islamic regime subjects workers to severe sentences and flogging in retaliation for their struggles and gives them long prison terms. A recent example is the sentencing of retired teacher Ismail Gerami to 5 years in prison and 74 lashes for participating in mass protests. We strongly condemn the issuing of such a heinous ruling, and as we have already stated, the Islamic regime of Iran should be expelled from the International Labor Organization and boycotted globally due to continuous repression of workers in Iran. We appreciate and greet the striking oil workers, and once again express our solidarity with these workers and all protesting workers in Iran. This is the statement from Freedom Now and signed by Stephanie Smith, President of BC General Employees Union, Sa'id Na'ma Nasser, President of General Federation of Trade Union and Employees of Iraq, Stefan von Tchaikovsky, President of Vancouver District Labor Council, John Clark, Packer, Visitor in Social Justice at York University in Toronto, Samir Nouri, Spokesperson Organizations of the Abolition of the Death Penalty in Iraq, Joseph Daher, Professor of University of Lausanne and one of the leaders of the Swiss Left Party, Peter Tachel, Director and Peter Tachel Foundations, myself, Chairperson of Local 803 Community Health Services, and Rita Malia, President of State President of CMF MEO, Eric Lee, Founding Editor of Labor Start, and Paul Keating, State President of Maritime Union of Australia, Sydney branch. Thank you, Bahram. This is the statement from Freedom Now to support oil workers in Iran. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Mas'ud, for that. And now we'll hear the Farsi version of this statement read out by Tami Sadawi. Tami, the mic is yours.
Hello everybody, I'm going to read the Farsi version. سلام دوستان عزیز، من قطعنامه‌ای که صادر شده توسط فعالین اتحادیه رو براتون به فارسی میخونم. از کارگران اعتصابی نفت در ایران حمایت میکنیم. جمهوری اسلامی باید از سازمان جهانی کار اخراج و در سطح جهان بایکوت شود. مطلع شدیم که ده‌ها هزار کارگر پیمانکاری نفت در بیش از 105 میدان نفتی در حال اعتصابند و خواست آنها افزایش دستمزد، 20 روز کار و 10 روز مرخصی در ماه، شرایط امن کار و بهبود شرایط زندگی و همچنین بهبود وضعیت قضایی در مراکز کار است که همه اینها بسیار نامرغوب و غیر قابل تحمل است. ما همچنین مطلع شدیم که یکی از تلاش‌های حکومت ایجاد شوراهای اسلامی برای تشدید کنترل خود بر کارگران است و کارگران با آن مخالفند و بر حق تشکیل سازمان‌های واقعی خود و حق تجمع و اعتراض تاکید دارند. از طرف دیگر پیمانکاران در تلاشند تا به اخراج کارگران روزمزد و بالا کشیدن دستمزدهای پرداخت نشده کارگران با اعتصاب گسترده کارگران نفت مقابله کنند. کارگران اعتصابی نفت در عوض خواستار خلعیت از پیمانکاران و بازگشت کلیه کارگران اخراج شده به سر کار خود هستند. یک گام مهم اعتصاب کارگران نفت تشکیل شورای اعتراضات کارگران است که نقش هماهنگی مؤثری در این اعتصاب دارد. اکنون پس از 25 روز خطر فشار مالی و همچنین اخراج‌های گسترده‌تر بالای سر کارگران قرار دارد. ما امضا کنندگان این نامه از کمپین برای آزادی کارگران زندانی Freedom Now تشکر می‌کنیم که از اخبار این اعتصاب گسترده کارگران نفت و وضعیت خطیر کارگران در این مبارزات ما را مطلع می‌کند و حمایت قاطع خود را از مبارزات و خواسته های این ده‌ها هزار کارگر اعتصابی ابراز می‌داریم. حق تشکل، اعتصاب و اعتراض حقوق پایه‌ای همه کارگران است. ما نقض مداوم این حقوق توسط حکومت اسلامی را محکوم می‌کنیم. خواستار آزادی فوری و بدون قید شرط کلیه کارگران زندانی، معلمان و زندانیان سیاسی در ایران هستیم. ما همچنین مطلع هستیم که رژیم اسلامی در مواردی در مقابله با مبارزات کارگران آنها را به مجازات شنی شلاق و زندانهای طویل المدت محکوم می کند. یک نمونه اخیر آن مجازات معلم بازنشسته اسماعیل گرامی به 5 سال زندان و 74 ضربه شلاق به جرم شرکت در تظاهرات است. ما صدور چنین احکام شنی را شدیداً محکوم می‌کنیم و همانطور که قبلا نیز اعلام کردیم رژیم اسلامی ایران باید به دلیل سرکوب مداوم کارگران در ایران از ILO سازمان جهانی کار اخراج گردد و در سطح جهان بایکوت شود. ما به کارگران اعتصابی نفت درود می‌فرستیم و بار دیگر همبستگی خود را با این کارگران و همه کارگران معترض در ایران ابراز می‌کنیم. کمپین برای آزادی کارگران Freedom Now. امضاها استفانی اسمیت رئیس اتحادیه کارگران خدمات عمومی، سعید نعما دبیر کل فدراسیون اتحادیه‌های کارگری، استفان وانت سیچوسکی دبیر کل شورای کارگری ونکوور و هومه بیدیاسی، جان کلارک کمپینر و استاد دانشگاه در کانادا، سمیر نوری سخنگوی کمیته بین‌المللی علیه اعدام در عراق، جوزف داهر استاد دانشگاه روزان و یکی از رهبران حزب سولیداریتی چپ سوئیس، پیتر تاچل مدیر بنیاد پیتر تاچل و کمپینر سیاسی، مسئول ارژنگ دبیر لوکال 803 اتحادیه خدمات بهداشتی جامعه در ونکوور کانادا، ریتا مالیا دبیر کل ایالات نیو ساوت ولز استرالیا اتحادیه کارگران ساختمانی، جنگلداری، دریانوردی، معدن و انرژی، اریک لی بنیانگذار سایت بین‌المللی کارگری لیورستاد، پول کینگ رئیس واحد سیدنی اتحادیه کشتیرانی در استرالیا. Thank you. مرسی.
خیلی ممنون. Thank you so much for that, مسعود and Tammy. And now we will see a video clip of the start of the strikes by the oil workers before we start with Shahla, the first speaker. So can we see the video clip of the oil workers strike, please?
کمپین 1400 فاز اختر فاز 13 اینم بچهای ما مردای تام روزگار. اینم مردای ما مثل مرد همه اومدن. همه میشینیم تا حقمونو بگیریم. اینم غناری من.
خب تاریخ 1/4/1400 نیروهای فرجود سایت یکی بوشهر
of the strikes by the oil workers in Iran. And now I'd like to call upon Shahla Dانشفر to take the mic as the first speaker. Shahla Dانشفر is the spokesperson for Freedom Now, campaign to free jailed workers in Iran. And she has spent several decades fighting for workers' rights and women's rights in Iran. She is a political activist and a well-known figure in the workers' movement in Iran. We are delighted to have Shahla with us. The mic's yours, Shahla. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody, and welcome. As the spokesperson of Freedom Now, I thank you very much for accepting our invitation and participating in this conference. Sorry, I speak in Farsi because I would like to address directly the workers in Iran. این کنفرانس صدای اعتراض شما کارگران پروژه پیمانی اعتصابی نفت که نزدیک 3 ماه علیه بساط چپاولگرانه پیمانکاران و قوانین برده‌وار مناطق ویژه اقتصادی در اعتصابید. شما که به سقوط هر روزه سطح معیشتتون، به وضع اسفناک شرایط کارتون، به قراردادهای برده‌وار موقت کاری و به امنیتی بودن فضای مراکز نفتی اعتراض دارید. کنفرانس حمایت قاطع خود رو از شما کارگران اعتصابی نفت اعلام میکنه. این کنفرانس صدای شما کارگران نیشکر هفت‌تپه است که 5 سال در اعتراضید. شما که با مبارزه جانانتون اسدبگی رو بیرون کردید و مطالبه امروزتون اداره این شرکت تحت نظارت شورایی و قدم به قدم پایه‌های شوراتون رو گذاشتید و نظارت شورایی رو دارید اجرا میکنید. این کنفرانس در این حال صدای اعتراض همه مردم علیه سرکوبگری‌های حکومت، علیه اعدام هاست، علیه زندان و شلاق و صدای اسماعیل گرامی، معلم بازنشسته‌ای که به خاطر شرکت در تجمعات اعتراضی علیه فقر و بی‌تأمینی به 5 سال حبس و 74 ضرب شلاق محکوم شد. کنفرانس بر ممنوعیت مجازات اسلامی شلاق و اعدام تاکید داره. هک شدن دوربین‌های مداربسته زندان اوین و انتشار ویدئوهای اون سند دیگری از جنایات رژیم تو زندان هاست. شکنجه و جنایت در زندان ها سیاست همیشگی حکومت اسلامیه. از جمله ستار بهشتی و شاهرخ زمانی از چهره‌های شناخته شده کارگری رو در زندان کشتن. کیفرخواست اسماعیل بخشی از کارگران نیشکر هفت‌تپه رو داشتیم و امروز هم سپیده قلیان، این دختر جسور زندانی، در نوشته تحت عنوان اینجا آخر دنیاست از وضع زنان زندانی در بوشه و شکنجه در زندان میگه. این کنفرانس صدای اعتراض علیه شکنجه و زندان و صدای کارگران زندانی، معلمان دربند و همه زندانیان سیاسی و بر آزادی بدون قید شرط تمامی زندانیان سیاسی تاکید داره. نوید افکاری به خاطر شرکت در خیزش مردمی اعدام شد و امروز سالگرد اعدام اون هست. 2 برادر اون هنوز در زندانن و وحید با همون جرم 25 سال حکم زندان و 2 سال تبعید گرفته. این کنفرانس صدای مادران دادخواه علیه چندین دهه جنایات حکومته. این کنفرانس صدای اعتراض مردم خوزستانه که حکومت اعتراض اونها رو به خاطر بی‌آبی با گلوله پاسخ داد و تعداد کشته شدن، 10 نفر بازداشت شدن که هنوز شماری در زندانن. جا داره در این کنفرانس همبستگیمون رو با مردم افغانستان اعلام کنیم. در نتیجه توطئه جهانی و ساخت پاخت آمریکا، طالبان دوباره به این کشور بازگشت و داره قتل و جنایت میکنه تا مستقر بشه. این کنفرانس صدای اعتراض مردم علیه کشتار جمعی در برابر بیماری مرگبار کرونا است. مردم خامنه‌ای و کل حاکمیت را عامل این کشتار میدونن. با فتوای اون واکسن وارد نشد و واکسیناسیون مردم انجام نگرفت و به جای پیشگیری و درمان مردم رو به خرافه و شفای الهی حواله دادن. مردم گرسنه و بی تامین ناگزیر بکارن. زندانها دایره، جامعه محروم به کام مرگ رها شده و حکومت خودش باعث شیوع بیماری شده و از قبل صنعت کرونا پولهای کلانی به جیب زدن. و بالاخره این کنفرانس تأکیدی دیگه بر بایکوت جهانی جمهوری اسلامی به خاطر همه این جنایاته. امروز بحث بر سر محاکمه سران حکومت به خاطر کشتار آبان و یا بررسی کشتار تابستان 67 روی میز آمده. این صدا انعکاس جهانی پیدا کرده. از عفو بین الملل تا سازمان ملل و نهادهای مختلف دارن از نقض حقوق بشر در ایران صحبت میکنن. ما میگیم گزارش کافی نیست. جمهوری اسلامی رو بایکوت کنید. سفارتخونه های اون رو ببندید. از تمام مراجع جهانی از جمله سازمان جهانی کار ILO اخراجش کنید. متشکرم.
Thank you very much for that, Shahla. I'll just give a translation of what Shahla said right now. Shahla said, greetings and welcome to all of you who have participated in this online conference of Freedom Now, campaign to free jailed workers in Iran. As the spokesperson of Freedom Now, I thank you very much for accepting our invitation and participating in this conference. The conference is the voice of striking oil workers who have been on strike since about 3 months ago against the rip-off by employers and contractors and the slavery laws of the special economic zones where employers' hands are left open for the harshest exploitation. The oil workers are protesting against skyrocketing prices and declining living standards, against job insecurity and temporary employment contracts, against delays in paying wages. They are protesting against layoffs, against the deplorable state of the camps and food and health in the workplace, against the police atmosphere of their workplaces. They are demanding 20 working days and 10 days off as a key demand so that they can breathe due to the heavy work pressure. And today one of their demands is mass vaccination against the mass murder by COVID-19 pandemic. The conference declares its strongest support for the oil workers. This conference is also the voice of Haftabe sugarcane workers who have been protesting for 5 years and managed to oust Asad Begi, the owner of the factory, and his mafia gang with a fierce struggle. But his dismissal should be a prelude to the fulfillment of their other demands. They are still protesting, and an important demand of theirs is the management of the company to come under the supervision of the factory's workers' council so that they no longer face problems such as delayed payments and risks to the survival of the company and other problems. This conference is also the voice of all the people protesting against the government's repression. Ismail Gerami is a retired teacher who was arrested for participating in protest rallies against poverty, misery, discrimination, and inequalities. And he was sentenced to 5 years in prison and 74 lashes. The conference emphasizes the prohibition of flogging, this brutal Islamic punishment, as well as the prohibition of the death penalty. Following the hacking of CCTV cameras in Evin prison in Tehran by a group of hackers and the release of videos from inside the prison, the world has now obtained undeniable evidence of torture and inhuman and violent treatment of prisoners in the prisons of the Islamic regime. In response to the film's release, Amnesty International called on the Islamic Republic to allow the UN Special Representative to visit Iranian prisons. The inhumane treatment of prisoners in the prisons of the Islamic Republic is not accidental and is organized and has lasted for more than 40 years. They killed a young worker called Sattar Beheshti under torture. Shahrukh Zamani, another well-known worker, was killed in prison. And today, Sepide Gholian, who is in prison for supporting the Haftape sugarcane workers, speaks of torture inside the prisons. Freedom Now has issued a joint statement with the Committee to Free Political Prisoners in Iran and the International Committee Against Executions, in which we urge international human rights organizations not to be indifferent to these reports. Using international laws, the Islamic Republic and the perpetrators of these inhumane acts should be prosecuted. These documents in the hands of any decent prosecutor in the countries in the West can be sufficient evidence to open a crime file against the Islamic Republic and its prison guards. Today's conference is the voice of protest of imprisoned workers, imprisoned teachers, and all political prisoners, and it stresses the closure of the security files of all political prisoners and their unconditional release. This conference is the voice of protest of the people of Khuzestan who took to the streets due to the water cut in the scorching heat of summer and the government responded to them with bullets. As a result, a number of protesters were killed and dozens were detained. A number of detainees are still in prison. This conference is the voice of the Mothers for Justice for victims of November 1998 and decades of government crimes, and victims such as Navid Afkari. Navid Afkari was arrested in 2017 and was executed for participating in a popular uprising. And now his brother Wahid has been sentenced to 25 years in prison, and his third brother is under same pressures in jail for the same and trumped up charges. As a result of US and global conspiracy, these days Taliban have returned to power in Afghanistan and are committing killings and crimes in order to consolidate their power. And one end of these conspiracies is the Islamic regime in Iran, the regime of Islamic terrorism in the region. This conference expresses its solidarity with the people of Afghanistan. This conference is a voice of protest against the mass murder of the people of Iran by the deadly disease of COVID-19, and the finger of the people as the perpetrators of this crime is pointed to Khamenei and the whole regime. Khamenei, who opposed the import of coronavirus, the COVID vaccine, a government that has referred people to superstition and divine healing, and has already pocketed large sums of money in the COVID industry. And we see people in the workplaces, in prisons, in barracks, and in the community without any equipment to deal with COVID-19. They have been left without their livelihood to die. In these dangerous circumstances, the government held its absurd general election and invited the people to participate, but it was boycotted massively. This conference is another emphasis on the global boycott of the Islamic Republic for all these crimes, and specifically emphasizes the closure of its embassies in all countries and the expulsion of this government from all international bodies, including the International Labour Organization. Thank you very much, Shahla, for that. And if John Clark is in the room, I'd like to invite him. Is John Clark here? Okay, I don't see him either. If not, then we'll wait for John to come later. So we'll now go to a video message by Stephanie Smith. And Stephanie Smith, we'll see that and I'll say a few words.
Salam.
My name is Stephanie Smith.
I'm the BC General Employees Union, representing more than 82,000 members. On behalf of those members and our union's International Solidarity Committee, it is my honor to bring a message of solidarity to all Iranian workers, especially striking oil workers. BCGU members know that Iranian workers, especially those in the oil industry, are being deprived of their rights. We support the demands of oil contract workers for job security, official employment contracts, and an end to oppressive laws in the special economic zones. BCGU members are appalled by the deplorable conditions that Iranian oil industry workers are forced to live and work in, and the devastating impact that COVID-19 has had because of those conditions. We believe that all workers have a fundamental right to safe and healthy workplaces, including standard camps with good sanitation, free and universal COVID-19 vaccinations, and good quality food. BCGU members are grateful to Freedom Now for raising awareness of the repressive and inhumane actions of Iran's Islamic government targeting Iranian workers and their advocates. Our union has repeatedly and forcefully expressed our opposition to those actions, including brutal prison sentences and the use of torture and execution in the prison system. That's why we support Freedom Now's campaign demanding Iran's expulsion from the ILO. All workers and unions must stand in solidarity with Iranian workers and in opposition to the actions and policies of Iran's Islamic regime. On behalf of the 82,000 members of the BCGEU, I want to express unwavering support and solidarity with striking oil workers and all workers in Iran. And I want to express my deep gratitude to the organizers for the opportunity to join you today. Motashakaram.
For that, and I should add that Stephanie has been an avid supporter of the struggles of the workers in Iran for many years, and we thank her for that brilliant message. Thank you very much, Stephanie. And we would like now to see another clip of the protests by the oil workers.
عرض سلام و خسته نباشید خدمت حضار محترم و همه نیروهای پروژه‌ای. دوستان عزیز، یه شعر بنده آماده کردم برای کسانی که پشت به کمپین کردن و ما را در این برهه تنها گذاشتن که عرض میکنم خدمت دوستان. سر بیدرد به دیوار بلا باید بود، پیش را در نفس درد رها باید کرد. ما نیروهای پروژه‌ای 40 روز است که به مسالمت آمیزترین شکل ممکن خواسته های خود را در سکوت فریاد میزنیم و تاکنون کسی صدای ما را نشنیده است. متاسفانه نه تنها مورد بی‌مهری مسئولی قرار گرفته ایم، بلکه آقای زنگنه وزیر نفت نیز گفته است که نیروهای پروژه‌ای با پیمانکاران مشکلاتشان را حل کنند. آقای وزیر، ما قلب تپنده صنعت هستیم. آقای روحانی، مگر شرافت‌تر از ما کارگران هم وجود دارد؟ ما نیروهای پروژه‌ای با اراده آهنین و دستانی پرتوان باعث ایجاد بزرگترین قطب‌های صنعتی ایران من جمله صنایع نفت و گاز شده ایم. دستاندرکاران پتروشیمی و پالایشگاه‌ها و مدیران میانی نیز از تخصص و سختی شرایط کار ما اطلاع کامل دارند. عده‌ای از پیمانکاران و شرکت‌ها و مدیران بالادستی چنین القا کردند که ما همه سال را کار می‌کنیم، در صورتی که با سابقه‌های طولانی در شغل‌های تخصصی و حساس در سال چندین ماه بیکاری را تحمل می‌کنیم و با پرداختی‌هایی با تأخیر چند ماهه شرایط بسیار سخت و نابرابر را برای ما و خانواده‌هایمان رقم می‌زنند. دوستان و همکاران گرامی، تا آنجا که شرافت و مردانگی حکم می‌کند پیمان بسته‌ایم تا احیای حق و حقوق خود استوار خواهیم ایستاد.
What we saw was as a video clip of a massive general assembly held by the oil workers, and this is one of the key developments in the strike by the oil workers, where they have been holding general assemblies and electing representatives by the rank and file oil workers, and as like a prelude to workers' councils, as has happened in Haftab sugarcane workers, where workers have formed their own workers' councils in order to fight for demands. And at Haftab sugarcane, they have also are working, pressing in order to bring the whole plant under their control. So these are massive developments in the labor movement in Iran, which we are witnessing, which are great and so fascinating to see. The next speaker is Peter Tatchell. Peter had said that he would be here by 8 p.m. Central European time. We still have 10 minutes. I'm not sure if Peter's in the room. I don't see Peter. So what we'll do is go to to the next speaker. The next speaker is Kaaظم نیکخواه. Kaaظم نیکخواه again is a well-known figure in the labor movement in Iran, and he's a political activist and has been fighting for years for workers' rights and to bring about change in the conditions of the people in Iran. He's the head of the International Relations of Freedom Now, Campaign to Free Jailed Workers in Iran, and is, as you know, one of the organizers of this conference. So I'd like to invite to Kaaظم نیکخواه. We are delighted to have you with us today, and the mic is yours.
Thank you, Baram. Greetings to all of you. First, I should mention that John Clark emailed me, texted me that he said very sorry about having computer problems. He tried several times but couldn't go through. So unfortunately, it seems that we can't have John Clark tonight. I am honored that I have been in contact with each one of you in these 2-3 weeks, and we managed together to organize this conference. The point that I want to make in this short time is about the oil workers' strike. The oil workers' strike, as you know, is going on, is 3 months now going on, and has a very positive impact on the political situation of society, and also have put heavy pressure on frail economy of the Islamic regime. The Islamic regime has pursued since decades ago a policy of dispersing the workers and militarization of the oil centers. First, they brought in some contractors and brokers or recruiting agencies, and started employing through these agencies for the oil, not by direct contact with the workers. There are some permanent workers, about 100,000, but they are not called workers. They are regarded as employees, and the regime tries to separate them from other workers. Besides this, they brought in thousands, tens of thousands of security guards and militia and spies, and to control all the oil centers. As a result, the workers couldn't move, and we couldn't hear the voice of the workers for many years. But from last year, this state system, this military system, I can say, was cracked and broken. 25,000 of workers went on strike, demanding better wages, better work conditions, and many other demands. The employers and the state government retreated, made promises to accept the workers' demands, and the workers returned on work. But the promises was not fulfilled. After some negotiations, arguments, and new unfulfilled promises, the workers decided this year to go on strike again, but this time by a much larger scale. 100,000, around 100,000 workers went on strike. Another important fact about this strike is that this strike is leading by two different organizations that they are, I can say, going in opposite directions. One is so-called piping group, which is trying to drag the workers behind the regime and has had a very divisive role in between the workers. The other organization is Oil Contract Workers Protest Organizing Council, which emerged in this time through the strike. This striking organizing council represent or introduce itself as representative of unity of all oil workers. And its force is that the workers implement their demands through their General Assembly, this decision of all workers, and their struggles. And it has been very effective in its efforts. And it has had a very attraction as that in society. So we think this organizing council of oil workers has a positive role in the struggle of the oil workers. One problem for the oil workers is that they work in remote areas far from each other, and they can't gather together, they are not concentrated. The organizing council emphasizes that the workers should rely or should promote their common aspirations and demands, and in this way show their interconnection and unity, and has been successful in doing so. And so this is the situation of oil workers now. As I said, it's 3 months that the strike is going on. Some workers have gone back to the work, but after the promises that they will accept their demands, but because the employers and contractors has not done their promises, they have started a strike again. So a strike is going on still, and we hope that the workers can get their demands fulfilled and so on. Thank you very much. I hope that this brief explanation can give you a picture of the oil workers strike. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Kazem. And I'll just, for the benefit of our Farsi-speaking audience, give a summary in Farsi, if you would bear with me. اینجا من میخوام متن فارسی سخنرانی کاظم نیکخواه رو خلاصی ازش بگم. درود بر شما، همه شما شرکت کنندگان در کنفرانس. مفتخرم که طی 2 یا 3 هفته گذشته با هر یک از شما به عنوان مسئول روابط بین‌المللی کمپین برای آزادی کارگران زندانی Freedom Now در تماس بودم و با هم توانستیم این کنفرانس را سازماندهی کنیم. نکته‌ای که می‌خواهم در این مدت کوتاه روی آن تمرکز کنم وضعیت اعتصاب کارگران نفت است. اعتصاب کارگران نفت نزدیک به 3 ماه است که ادامه دارد. این اعتصاب تأثیر بسیار مثبتی بر کل فضای سیاسی جامعه داشته است و همچنین فشار زیادی بر اقتصاد ضعیف رژیم اسلامی وارد کرده است. رژیم اسلامی از سالها پیش تا کنون سیاست خاصی را در قبال نفت در پیش گرفته است که میتوان آن را سیاست پراکنده کردن و پادگانی کردن نامگذاری کرد. اولین سیاستی که ابتدا در پیش گرفتن این بود که استخدام کارگران را از طریق پیمانکاران انجام دادند و از استخدام مستقیم کارگران توسط صنعت نفت خودداری کردند. نتیجه این شد که هر چند صد کارگر با کارفرمای معینی روبرو هستند. البته برخی از کارگران قرارداد رسمی دارند و مستقیما توسط نفت استخدام شدند، اما نه به عنوان کارگر بلکه به عنوان کارمند، و حکومت به طور جدی تلاش کرده است که آنها را از بقیه کارگران جدا کند. علاوه بر این آنها 10,000 نیروی حراست، پاسدار و نیروی انتظامی و جاسوس‌هایشان را به نفت آوردند. همه این اقدامات با این هدف صورت گرفت که روی کارگران نفت کنترل داشته باشند. آنها بر نفت با روش‌های کاملا پلیسی و نظامی حکومت می‌کردند. به همین دلیل کارگران سالها نمی‌توانستند تکان بخورند و صدایی از کارگران شنیده نمی‌شد. اما سال گذشته این فضای پلیسی و پادگانی ترک برداشت و شکسته شد. 25,000 کارگر نفت سال گذشته به مدت 1 ماه دست به اعتصاب زدند و خواستار افزایش دستمزد، تغییر روزهای کار به 20 روز کار و 10 روز تعطیل، شرایط کار مناسبتر و امثال اینها شدند. در پاسخ به این حرکت گسترده کارگران، دولت و کارفرمایان عقب نشینی‌هایی کردند، وعده‌هایی دادند و کارگران به سر کار بازگشتند. اما وعده‌ها عمدتاً عملی نشد. پس از چند ماه مذاکره، مشاجره، بهانه‌ها و وعده‌های عملی نشده بیشتر، سرانجام کارگران تصمیم گرفتند که دوباره اعتصاب کنند. اما این بار در مقیاس بسیار وسیع‌تر. حدود 100,000 کارگر اعتصاب کردند. واقعیت مهم دیگر در مورد این اعتصاب این است که 2 نهاد مختلف این اعتصاب را هدایت و رهبری می‌کنند که باید بگویم در 2 جهت متضاد حرکت می‌کنند. یکی گروه به اصطلاح موسوم به گروه پایپینگ است که از ابتدا خط و سیاست کشاندن کارگران به دنبال سیاست‌های رژیم را دنبال می‌کرد و در این مدت چندین بار سعی کرد اعتصاب را پایان دهد و نقش تفرقه افکنانه‌ای بین کارگران ایفا می‌کند. یکی دیگر از سازمان‌های نهادهایی که در رهبری اعتصاب نقش دارد، شورای سازماندهی اعتراضات کارگران پیمانی نفت است که طی همین اعتصاب ایجاد شد. شورای سازماندهی اعتراضات کارگران نفت خود را نماد اتحاد همه کارگران نفت معرفی می‌کند و تلاشش این است که تضمین کند که کارگران خواسته‌های خود را از طریق اتحاد خود و با اتکا به مجمع عمومی و تصمیم مستقیم همه کارگران عملی کنند. از این نظر ما فکر می‌کنیم که این شورا در اعتصاب و در کل فضای جنبش کارگری نقش مثبتی دارد و توجه بسیاری را به خود جلب کرده است. یکی از مشکلات کارگران نفت این است که آنها در مناطق دورافتاده کار می‌کنند و متمرکز نیستند و به همان دلایلی که گفتم با کارفرمایان مختلفی روبرو هستند. شورای سازماندهی اعتراضات تاکید می‌کند که کارگران باید بر خواسته‌های مشترک خود تمرکز کنند و به این ترتیب ارتباط و اتحاد خود را بازتاب دهند. همه این خواست‌ها همانطور که اشاره کردم 20 روز کار و 10 روز مرخصی و خلایت از پیمانکاران و 2 برابر شدن دستمزدهاست که در برخی واحدهای نفت توسط پیمانکاران پذیرفته شده و از نظر این نهاد باید مبنای توافق در همه واحدها باشد. با این توضیح کوتاه امیدوارم تصویری از اعتصاب کارگران نفت به دست داده باشد. خیلی متشکرم از شما کاظم نیکخواه. Thank you very much, Kazem, for that. And now I can see Peter Tatchell in the room. Welcome, Peter. You've come right on time. And it's your turn now. Just before I hand over the mic to you, I'd like just to introduce Peter. Peter is the director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation. He's a well-known human rights campaigner, and he's best known for his work with LGBT social movements. And without further ado, we are really delighted to have Peter with us today. And the mic's yours, Peter. Thanks very much. I think you're mute, Peter.
Thank you very much. My apologies that I was not able to join you earlier, but I had previous engagements, and at about 8 o'clock or just before, I need to go to another engagement. But it is a great honor to join you, and I want to start by expressing my solidarity with political prisoners in Iran and their loved ones and families, their supporters, and of course, all of you who are campaigning for a free and democratic Iran. Your struggle under conditions of great adversity is so admirable. I'm so inspired by your courage, your determination, despite the odds being stacked against you. We know that sometimes campaigning does work, Sometimes people due to be executed, their lives are saved. Sometimes people who are being tortured, the torture is stopped. Sometimes political prisoners who are... So a huge, huge appreciation and admiration for all of you who are working to support political prisoners in Iran. I want to say that I'm sure many issues will have been covered by other speakers, but I'd like to focus on what can be done. And one of the most important initial things, of course, is to raise public and international awareness, which is what this event is seeking to do. So many people around the world are unaware of the extreme oppression of the Iranian regime. They see, you know, a quite modern society, a quite well-educated society. They see the PR efforts of the Iranian regime. Many do not realize the scale of internal repression and the extreme brutality of the penal system, whereby fair trials are almost unheard of for political prisoners, where many confessions are extracted under torture, and where people are hanged because of state-manufactured evidence or forced confessions. So raising awareness is the number one priority. And it pains me greatly that many on the liberal and left progressive spectrum of opinion in the West do so little to support our comrades in Iran. Of course, the left and liberal progressive opinion will rally to many causes, but there seems to be a singular lack of serious solidarity by Western left, liberal and progressive people. I can remember, I think it was, 20 years ago, or maybe a bit less, in one single night, 800 trade unionists, mostly members of the bus workers union in Tehran, 800 trade unionists were arrested on a single night in Tehran. There were almost no trade unions in the West who rallied to protest and support those jailed trade unionists. When the trials came up, again, there was almost no support from Western trade unions or liberal progressive organizations. And it pains me as someone on the left to say this, because the left should be in solidarity with workers and Democrats and liberals and progressive people right across the globe. You know, there should be no borders when it comes to international solidarity. So that's another strand that we have to build, as well as building public awareness about the scale of repression in Iran. We also need to build solidarity movements, which will support trade unions and workers who are being victimized by the regime, students and other activists, oppositionists, critics, dissidents who are being jailed and tortured, women's rights campaigners. Again, it's so shocking to me to think that, you know, on International Women's Day, a group of women gather in Tehran in so-called Justice Square to protest for women's rights. They're beaten and arrested by the police, and Western feminists, for the most part, do nothing, say nothing, completely ignore the heroic struggle of those women. And of course, we know in more recent years, the way in which so many Iranian women have thrown off the hijab, refused to abide by the compulsory requirement that they wear the hijab. And many of them have been sentenced to long terms of imprisonment. But again, Western left and feminist movements have been, for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, singularly failing in showing solidarity with those brave, heroic women. The same goes to trade unionists and workers, the sugar workers, the bus workers, many of the bakers workers, leaders in prison, denied medical treatment, simply for trying to organize to defend their rights, to protest against the non-payment of wages, to protest against unsatisfactory health and safety in the workplace, to protest against being forced to work long hours. These should be acts of automatic solidarity by Western progressive movements. Likewise, when it comes to human rights defenders and others who are seeking to shine a light on the injustices, when they are imprisoned, yes, there are some campaigns to support them, but not nearly enough. And I just find it so strange. When Israel does a single bad thing, the whole Western left, progressive left, will protest, and quite rightly. But when Iran does things many times worse, there's almost universal silence. And this is no more acute when it comes to the rights of the Awazi Arab people in southwest Iran. These are Arabs, kindred spirits of Palestinian Arabs. Israel, I've got many criticisms of the way Israel treats its Arab population, both inside Israel, in the occupied territories, and the whole setup in the Middle East. But it is nothing by comparison to what Iran does to its own Arab population. They are banned from forming their own political parties. They're banned from having newspapers in their own Arab language. They are banned from teaching Arabic in schools. Cultural workers, those promoting Arab culture, poetry, literature, and art, are regularly arrested on trumped up charges. Now, Israel may do many bad things, but nothing like this. Yet the Western left is so silent about what are far more extreme actions against Arab people by the Iranian regime. It is frankly hypocrisy. It is double standards. And I feel so ashamed to be someone on the left, to see the way in which the left refuses to show Iranian Arabs the same solidarity they show Palestinian Arabs. And of course, it's not just the Arab minority, it's the Baluch minority, the Turkoman, the Kurdish, the Azeri, all the other minority nationalities within Iran are also treated very badly. Similar cultural, economic, and political repression. So this really is a huge challenge for all of us in the international community. What can we do to support these many disparate struggles in Iran? I haven't mentioned, of course, LGBT plus people in Iran, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Iranians, who also are victimized and face the death penalty for same-sex relations in Iran. Again, this is an issue which far too few people on the progressive left of Western opinion have rallied to support. I want to say that many of us will be familiar with the policy of boycott, disinvestment, and sanctions as it was applied to apartheid South Africa and as it is applied by many against Israel today. But why is there no comparable boycott, disinvestment, and sanctions campaign against Iran? Iran ranks with apartheid South Africa and Israel in terms of the way it abuses and oppresses its citizens and those under its occupation. I've got to say that, we know that boycott, sanctions, and disinvestment do work. They are non-violent, they are peaceful, but they do work. And I would say that we need to explore more avenues and opportunities to apply BDS against the Iranian regime, while at the same time being very careful that we avoid penalizing, punishing, and causing harm to ordinary Iranians. The people of Iran are not our enemy. It is the regime, and they are the ones that need to be targeted. So I would like to suggest that we need to draw up a proper program for boycott, sanctions, and disinvestment in Iran. Now, of course, there's not much investment going on, but if the nuclear deal is fixed, there will be a rush to investment. And we know that many Western companies are lining up to invest in Iran in the hope that there will be a resolution to the nuclear issue. We need to make sure that these Western corporations are held to account, that they must not invest in a country where the regime is abusing its people. Two other things I'd like to suggest. One is using international law. The case in Sweden is a classic example of the use of international law as it can be applied against the Iranian regime. So we have the International United Nations Convention Against Torture 1984, which has been signed by over 130 or 140 countries now. It allows for the prosecution of any state official anywhere in the world who commits, condones, authorizes, or acquiesces in acts of torture. And that is the basis on which the case in Sweden is now proceeding. But I would like to see similar cases proceeded, not just in Sweden, but in many other countries as well. There's a clear international legal mandate to do so. And I'm not suggesting that it alone can change things. But if people in Iran think that one day they may be hauled before an international court and be imprisoned for a very long time, it may act as some deterrent against some of the worst excesses of the regime. The other issue I'd like to raise is the question that there is nothing to stop any country from issuing international arrest warrants against leaders of the Iranian political and military and indeed religious regime for human rights abuses. Again, the issue would be when and how to execute that warrant. That would be very difficult unless those people traveled overseas to a Western country or indeed any country which had issued an arrest warrant. But again, it acts as a powerful deterrent. It restricts their freedom of movement. It makes life more difficult. And finally, I'd suggest that it'd be worthwhile exploring use of the American Alien Tort Act. Under this act, a number of international human rights abusers have been prosecuted or legal actions have been brought against them using this very ancient bit of American law dating back, I think, nearly 200 years. But it does give a legal basis for action in the American courts, in the US courts, against human rights abusers. So those are a number of issues and ideas that I would suggest that are worth exploring. We know that there is no guarantee that any of them will work, but we know from past experience with other countries, some of them sometimes can work. And the more pressure we can heap upon the Iranian regime, the better. The more likely that they will perhaps be deterred from some of their worst excesses. I'm not expecting them to become angels overnight, no way, but maybe some of the worst excesses of the regime will be held in check. So I'm going to finish there, and if anybody wants to ask any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But once again, huge solidarity with you, with all of you who are struggling for democracy, freedom, and human rights in Iran. You are inspirational. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks so much for that, Peter. That's really brilliant. And just for the benefit of our Farsi-speaking speakers, audience, I will just go through the main points that you raised. It'll have to be in Farsi. من چند نکته از نکات کلیدی صحبت‌های پیتر تچل رو براتون اینجا میخونم. پیتر گفت که متاسفه که نتونسته سر وقت بیاد و چون یک برنامه دیگه‌ای بود و ساعت فقط 8 اروپا میتونست بیاد تو برنامه، ولی البته اینو از قبل گفته بودن، مسئله نبود. و گفته که من میخوام همبستگیمو با شما ابراز بکنم و نشون داده که کمپین ها، کاری که شما دارین میکنید مثل این کارهای کمپینی مؤثرن، میتونن زندانیان سیاسی رو نجات بدن، میتونن جلوی شکنجه رو بگیرن. و در این حال به چند نکته خواسته اشاره بکنه. گفت یک نکته مهم توجه افکار عمومی رو جلب کردن به شرایط وضعیت مردم در ایرانه، شدت و وسعت سرکوب در ایران که خیلی ها مطلع نیستن و قوانین هاری که در ایران حاکمه، شکنجه، اعدام و اینکه امنیتی میکنن، پاپوش درست میکنن بدون هیچ مدرکی برای افراد و زندانی میکنن اینا رو. و در این حال خواست اشاره بکنه به عکس‌العمل گروه‌های لیبرال و چپ و بخش مترقی جامعه در غرب که به ویژه تو انگلیس که به نظرش ممکنه اونا کارهای خوبی در یه موارد دیگه میکنن، ولی در این مورد، در مورد جنایاتی که جمهوری اسلامی میکنه به نحو عجیبی اینا ساکت هستند. و اشاره کرد پیتر تچل به اعتصاب کارگران شرکت واحد و گفت که حدود 800 کارگر اون موقع تو اون اعتصاب بزرگ دستگیر شدن، ولی حمایت قابل توجهی از طرف اون به اصطلاح بخش مترقی جامعه نبود. البته من خودم اشاره بکنم که اتحادیه کارگری، چند اتحادیه کارگری فعال شدن در این زمینه، ولی به طور عمومی نکته پیتر تچل اینه که از اون بخش به اصطلاح لیبرال و به اصطلاح چپ جامعه. و میگفت در روز جهانی زن شما میبینید که زنان شجاعی در ایران بلند میشن، حجابا رو دور میندازن، سرود میخونن و اعتراض میکنن به علیه حجاب. و در این حال شما نمیبینی که حمایت خیلی وسیعی از طرف یا مطلقاً از طرف فمینیستای رسمی توی غرب صورت بگیره. در اکثر موارد گفتن اینطوری، ممکنه بعضیا بکنه ولی خیلی کمه و این میگه که خیلی مایه تاسفه. در این حال میگه که وقتی که مثلا دولت اسرائیل که یه کاری میکنه اینا خیلی راحت میان محکوم میکنن، که میگه درسته در موارد زیادی باید محکوم کرد، ولی در جنایات خیلی وحشتناکتر که تو ایران تحت حاکمیت جمهوری اسلامی صورت میگیره میبینید که بخشی از این بخش پروگرسیو یا مترقی جامعه ساکته و مثال میزنن در این حال وضعیت مردم در خوزستان و اعتراضاتی که شد، مردم عرب که از خیلی از خواستای خود محروم هستند و همینطور در مورد مردم بلوچ و در مورد آذری ها. و میگفت که عکس‌العمل و حمایتی رو کم میبینیم از طرف این بخشی از جامعه. به هر حال میگفت که چالش بزرگی ما باید یک کاری بکنیم که چه کار میتونیم بکنیم و در مورد دگرباشان جنسیتی و LGBT ها هم اشاره کرد که مثلا زمینه فعالیت خیلی اصلی پیتر تچله و گفتن که در این موردم که تو ایران جمهوری اسلامی اعدام میکنه کسی رو به خاطر این که یه بخش متعلق به بخش LGBT جامعه است و میبینیم که در این مورد هم باید اون اعتراضی که در سطح جهانی با صورت بگیره نمیشه. و به طور مشخص چند تا چیز رو اشاره میکنه پیتر تچل. یکی بایکوت جمهوری اسلامیه. من اشاره بکنم که پیتر تچل از خودش از اون یکی از امضا کنندگان کمپین برای بایکوت جمهوری اسلامیه، کمپینی که مدافعین زیادی داره و میگه که مایه تعجبه که وقتی که تو اواخر دهه 80 دولت نجات پرست آفریقای جنوبی از طرف جهان مورد بایکوت و طرد و انزوا قرار گرفت، این همین در مورد جمهوری اسلامی اتفاق نمیفته. میگه که این زمینه‌ای که ما براش باید کار بکنیم و این خیلی میتونه موثر باشه. در این حال به دو مورد دیگه هم اشاره میکنه برای محاکمه سران جمهوری اسلامی، مثل موردی که الان در سوئد در جریان حمید نوری که من اضافه بکنم معذورشونه و به عنوان به خاطر جنایت علیه بشریت و به خاطر شکنجه. و میگه از قوانینی که همین الان موجوده میشه استفاده کرد، مثل قانون علیه شکنجه Convention Against Torture و همینطور قوانینی که توی آمریکا هست مانند Alien Tort Act، قانون Alien Tort که بر اساس اون جرایم بین‌المللی رو میشه به دادگاه کشوند. به هر حال اینا نکات اصلی صحبت‌های پیتر تچر بود که ما ازش تشکر می‌کنیم به خاطر شرکت در این برنامه. الان میریم یک کلیپ اعتراضات کارگران شرکت هفت تپه ببینیم که 5 ساله در جدال با باند مافیایی اسدبگی بودن و علیه چپاول و دزدی حاکم، علیه سرکوب‌ها و برای حفظ زندگی و معیشت خود و علیه تعرضات هر روزه به زندگی و معیشتشون اعتراض جانانه‌ای رو پیش میبرن. این کلیپ رو میبینیم، بعدش برمیگردیم به سخنان بعدی. And what we saw, as you saw, there were the magnificent strike and the struggle by the Haftape sugarcane workers, and that has been going on for 5 years, and they've involved the people of the city of Shush as well, as you saw, with the marches, and they have had significant achievements and victories in the struggle, relying on the Workers' Council. And we'll now go to our next speaker. The next speaker is Eric Lee. Eric Lee is the founding editor of Labour Start. If you're familiar with Labour Start, you would be familiar with the motto, which is written at the top of the web page. So where trade unionists, Labour Start, where trade unions start their day on the net. And that's really true. Not just trade unionists, but lots of people, anybody wanting to be in touch with a huge community of activists, labor activists, and people fighting for justice. That is an amazing source, an amazing network, and Eric Lee has founded this, and we are really delighted to have Eric at this conference. And I should also mention Eric Lee has been supporting the workers' strikes and struggles in Iran and in many other countries for many years. And also he's a signatory to to the international campaign for the political boycott of the regime in Iran, which Peter also referred to. And we are delighted to have Eric with us. And Eric, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much for that. Very kind words. And thank you for inviting me to participate in this very important event. The Islamic Republic of Iran is a clerical fascist regime. It is essentially no different from the fascist regimes we know from history. Mussolini's Italy, Franco's Spain, and most infamously, Hitler's Germany. It is a regime that has no claim to legitimacy, as it does not rule with the consent of its people. It rules by terror and terror alone. In 1933, shortly after Hitler came to power, he crushed the German trade union movement and set up a state-controlled labor front instead. Only a few days after his thugs seized control of union buildings and jailed trade unionists, the International Labor Conference convened in Geneva. This conference, which is the decision-making body of the International Labor Organization, the ILO, is filled with representatives of governments, employers, and trade unions. That year, the Germans attempted to seat the delegation from the newly created State Labor Front. The international trade union movement united to fight against this. While governments, including the British government, had no objection to Hitler's Nazis being seated at the conference, the trade unionists blocked the seating of the so-called worker delegates from Germany. As the leader of the French trade unions said at the time, jailers never have the right to represent prisoners. The entire German delegation was forced to return to Berlin, and the country withdrew from the ILO later that year. As a recent book put it, the ILO was the first international organization to refuse recognition to the Nazi dictatorship. And this was done through the workers' group of the ILO without relying on governments or employers. Which brings me to the present day. The ILO still exists. The International Labor Conference still convenes every June in Geneva. And every year, the clerical fascist regime in Iran sends a delegation of so-called workers' representatives to take their seats as part of the workers' group. These delegates do not represent the workers. They represent the regime. They are today, as were the German delegates back in 1933, jailers being given the right to represent prisoners. This cannot continue. I believe the time has come to launch a massive grassroots campaign in the world's trade unions to demand that the workers' group in the ILO, which is dominated by unions affiliated to the International Trade Union Confederation, repeat now what our comrades did back in 1933. We must demand that the Iranian regime free all political prisoners and recognize the rights of workers to join and form trade unions of their own choosing, to strike and to bargain collectively. Until that happens, the regime must not be given legitimacy, and its so-called worker representatives must be turned away. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Eric. And I'll just go through some of the points that you raised in Farsi. اریک لی که بنیانگذار سایت لیب استارت، نکته اولش این بود که جمهوری اسلامی، باید ما بپذیریم که جمهوری اسلامی یک رژیم فاشیست اسلامیه و هیچ مشروعیتی نداره از طرف مردم، فقط با ترور حکمرانی میکنه و میگه که اگه از این نظر مقایسه تاریخی بکنیم، هیتلر و نازی‌ها هم همین کار رو کردن و اونا وقتی به قدرت رسیدن اولین کارهاشون این بود که اتحادیه کارگری رو در هم بشکنن و به جاش یک جبهه‌ای یا نهادی گذاشتن به نام State Labor Front، یک جبهه دولتی کار اسمش بخوایم ترجمه کنیم. و کاری که اونا کردن با اعتراض اتحادیه‌های کارگری در سراسر دنیا مواجه شد و اتحادیه کارگری در فرانسه مثلا اینطور توصیف کردن، گفتن که زندانبانان نمیتونن نماینده زندانیان باشن. کسی که زندانبانه نمیتونه نمایندگی بکنه زندانی رو و بر این مبنا خواستن که آیلو، سازمان جهانی کار، که اینا رو راه نده در اونجا. و آیلو، سازمان جهانی کار، اولین سازمانی شد که به دیکتاتوری نازیستا نگفت و اونا رو راه نداد. و میگه امروز آیلو هنوز سر کاره، سازمان جهانی کار سر کاره و اتفاق مشابهی داره اتفاق میفته. جمهوری اسلامی، رژیم فاشیست اسلامی داره نمایندگان خودش و هیئت نمایندگی خود دولت رو میفرسته به اونجا، مثل سال 1933 که وقتی که رژیم هیتلر این کارو کرد. و کاری که باید ما بکنیم وقتمون رسیده که همون شعار رو بدیم که بازجو یا زندانبان نمیتونه نماینده زندانی باشه و باید همون کاری بکنیم که رفقای ما در اتحادیه کارگری سال 1933 انجام دادن و جلوی حضور اونها را در سازمان جهانی کار بگیریم. و این نکات اصلی اریکلی بود که اینجا بیان کردم و همونطور که من اشاره کردم اریکلی از امضا کنندگان کمپین برای بایکوت جمهوری اسلامی و خواهان اخراج جمهوری اسلامی از نهادهای بین‌المللی و به طور ویژه سازمان جهانی کار. خیلی تشکر میکنم از اریکلی. Thank you, Eric, for those words. And now we go to the next point in the program for today, and that is the speech by Sa'id Na'ma. And Sa'id Na'ma is the president of the General Federation of Trade Unions and Employees of Iraq. He is also a signatory to the international campaign to boycott the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I would like to invite Sa'id Na'ma, who will speak in Arabic, and I will give a brief summary of his speech in English and Farsi. And there is Samir in the house, in the room, who can help us facilitate the translation. If Sa'id Na'ma is ready to speak, we'd be delighted to welcome him to the floor. Sa'id Na'ma? Okay, maybe he's not in the room now, but so we will go to the next point on the program. And what we're going to do is, as a sort of a break, we're going to listen to some music, a protest song. And so if we are ready, then we'll see that clip now.
Du fond de ma cité HLM, jusque dans ta campagne profonde, notre réalité est la même, et partout la révolte gronde. Dans ce monde on n'avait pas notre place, on n'avait pas la gueule de l'emploi, on n'est pas né dans un palace, on n'avait pas la CBA papa. SDF, chômeurs, ouvriers, paysans, immigrés sans papier, ils ont voulu nous diviser, faut dire qu'ils y sont arrivés. Tant que c'était chacun pour sa gueule, leur système pouvait prospérer. Mais fallait bien qu'un jour on se réveille et que les têtes se remettent à tomber. On lâche rien, 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 on lâche rien. Ils nous parlaient d'égalité et comme des cons on les a crus. Démocratie, fais-moi marrer, si c'était le cas on l'aurait su. Que pèse notre bulletin de vote face à la loi du marché. C'est con mes chers compatriotes, mais on s'est bien fait baiser. Et que pèsent les droits de l'homme face à la vente d'un Airbus? Au fond, y a qu'une seule règle en somme, se vendre plus pour vendre plus. La République se prostitue sur le trottoir des dictateurs. Leurs belles paroles, on n'y croit plus. Nos dirigeants sont des menteurs. On lâche rien, 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 on lâche rien. C'est tellement con, tellement banal de parler de paix, de fraternité, quand des SDF crèvent sur la dalle et qu'on mène la chasse aux sans-papiers, qu'on jette des miettes aux prolétaires, juste histoire de les calmer, qui s'en prennent pas aux patrons millionnaires, trop précieux pour notre société. C'est fou comme ils sont protégés, tous nos riches et nos puissants. Y a pas à dire, ça peut aider d'être l'ami du président. Chers camarades, chers électeurs, chers citoyens, consommateurs, le réveil a sonné, il est l'heure de remettre à zéro les compteurs. Tant qu'il y a de la lutte, il y a de l'espoir. Tant qu'il y a de la vie, il y a du combat. Tant qu'on se bat, c'est qu'on est debout. Tant qu'on est debout, on lâchera pas. La rage de vaincre coule dans nos veines. Maintenant tu sais pourquoi on se bat. Notre idéal, bien plus qu'un rêve. Un autre monde, on n'a pas le choix. On lâche rien, 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 on lâche rien.
Okay, now we will go to the if Said Na'ma is in the room, I can't see him. So Samir, we will go to the next speaker, who is Samir Nouri. Samir Nouri is the spokesperson for the Organization for the Abolition of the Death Penalty in Iraq. He's a political activist and a campaigner of many years, and he fighting for change in Iraqi society for many years, and I'm really delighted to welcome Samir Nouri to speak as the next speaker. The mic is yours, Samir. Thank you.
Thank you, Baram. Marhaban. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me in this conference. My name is Samir Nouri. I represent the Organization of Abolition Death Penalty in Iraq. Today, we are here in the conference organized to show our solidarity with the oil workers' strike in Iran and to demand the expulsion of the Islamic Republic of Iran out of ILO. Islamic Republic of Iran is recognized for the exclusion of tens of thousands of people. Islamic Republic of Iran prohibits the organization of workers, arrests the workers' leaders and tortures them like Ja'far Azimzada, Parveen Mohammadi, Ismail Bakshi, Spida Kalyan, Muhammad Salahi, etc. prohibits the celebration of May Day and arrests the leaders who are involving in the organizing. Daily, they kill the workers working between the borders of Iraq and Iran. And Islamic Republic of Iran supporting the Islamic militias, killers groups in Iraq. And more than 800 activists have been killed by them since October Revolution started in October 2019. The lists of their crimes is too long. It's shameful that they are a part of ILO. We demand the expulsion of Islamic Republic of Iran from ILO immediately. At the last, I say, workers of the world unite. كل التضامن مع عمال إيران. شكرا. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Samir. Fantastic to hear your words. And I will just say a few words in Farsi, translate some of the points Samir Nouri raised. چند تا از نکاتی که سمیر نوری فعال سیاسی و رئیس سازمان کمپین برای لغو مجازات اعدام در عراق رو من براتون اینجا نکاتش رو میخونم. ممنون که مرا به این کنفرانس دعوت کردید. نام من سمیر نوری است. من نماینده سازمان دفاع از لغو مجازات اعدام در عراق هستم. امروز ما در این کنفرانس حضور داریم تا همبستگی خود را با اعتصاب کارگران نفت در ایران ابراز کنیم و از خواست اخراج رژیم اسلامی ایران از آیلو دفاع کنیم. رژیم اسلامی ایران به اعدام ده‌ها هزار نفر شناخته شده است. رژیم اسلامی ایران 1. متشکل شدن کارگران را ممنوع کرده است. 2. رهبران کارگران را دستگیر می‌کند و آنها را مانند جعفر عظیمزاده، پروین محمدی، اسماعیل بخشی، سپیده قلیان، محمود صالحی و غیره شکنجه کرده است. 3. برگزاری اول ماه مه روز جهانی کارگر را مانع می شود و فعالین کارگری را دستگیر می کند. 4. هر روز کولبران یا کارگرانی را که بین مرزهای عراق و ایران کار می کنند به قتل می رساند. 5. این رژیم از گروه‌های تروریست اسلامی در عراق حمایت می کند و از زمان شروع انقلاب اکتبر در عراق از اکتبر 2019 تا کنون بیش از 800 نفر از معترضین توسط این تروریست‌های اسلامی کشته شدند. لیست جنایت این حکومت بسیار طولانی است. این شرم‌آور است که این حکومت عضو سازمان جهانی کار آیلوست. ما خواستار اخراج فوری جمهوری اسلامی از سازمان جهانی کار هستیم. کارگران جهان متحد شوید. خیلی ممنون از Samir Nouri. Thank you very much, Samir Nouri, for that. And now we go to see a video message by our next speaker, so who couldn't attend in person at the conference, but has sent a video message, and that is Joseph Dyer. And Joseph Dyer is a Swiss Syrian socialist activist. He's a professor, and he's an academic and author. And he's also one of the signatories to the international campaign to boycott the regime in Iran. And if we are ready, we will see the video by Joseph Dyer.
Good evening, comrades. On the occasion of this event, I would like to address my total solidarity with the waves of strikes of temporary contract workers in Iran's oil and gas industry, and which is also heavily based in Khuzestan, composed in majority of Arab population that have suffered of decades of structural and racist oppression from the Islamic Republic of Iran. These strikes, which began on June 19th and spread to hundreds of production sites, are demanding better and safer working conditions, the right to organize, to be free of police surveillance and repression, are, in my eyes, an example of courage and determination that should be saluted and supported by all international socialists throughout the world struggling against exploitation and oppression. Also, I think we should salute the level of organization that has been reached with these recent oil strikes, which was facilitated by national coordination. As we know, the petroleum industry is a key industry for Iran and is generally highly secularized, and so it's a surveilled sector suffering a lot of repression. And the state represses independent labor organization. Despite this, contract workers in the petroleum industry have been able to form and establish autonomous labor organization through inventive means, such as creating coordinating umbrella organization and holding local gatherings. In many aspects, these strikes represent a struggle against this authoritarian neoliberalism of the Islamic Republic of Iran. These workers have accumulated experience for years of struggle, and therefore are able to sustain on a longer period than before. So again, all my support. And more generally, these grievances and demands from the oil workers resonate with large sections of the working population in Iran, and revive at the same time political memories of oil workers' special role in the historical events around the Iranian Revolution in 1978-79 that led to the overthrow of the Shah, the dictatorship of the Shah. So I think these oil strikes are representative of an important trend in Iran, of the growth of labor protests. Obviously, we cannot draw any definitive conclusion right now, but as the workers themselves indicate, they might contribute to these workers' struggle might contribute to the rise of new workers' organization, autonomous one from the state, combative one, also aligning itself with the various political mobilization around democratic issues, ecological issues, around oppression, etc. So I'm in total solidarity with this kind of struggle of the oil workers. And in addition, I think it's important to say, in addition to my solidarity to the oil workers, I would like to say also a word for the Afghan refugees and migrants living in Iran, which amount to around 3 million, and have been demonstrating in Iran against the current Taliban government that just came to power, that was welcomed also by Tehran, that helped this Islamic fundamentalist movement came to power as well. Demonstrations have been repressed by the Islamic Republic of Iran, protests in Iran against the Taliban. So all my solidarity also to the Afghan. Obviously, I also want to say all my solidarity to all the political prisoners in Iran, whether trade unionists, feminists, human rights, lawyers, journalists, environmentalists, ecologists, etc., and all the people that have been imprisoned to oppose this criminal oppressive regime in Iran. I think we must be very clear that all solidarity with Iran will have also all solidarity with the Iranian popular classes must be clear in its opposition to US imperialism and Israel attacks against Iran, while simultaneously holding accountable the Iranian regime for its crimes against the Iranian people, popular classes especially, and its foreign intervention and oppressing people in Iraq, in Syria, Iraq, and other interventions in Afghanistan, Lebanon, and Yemen as well. So solidarity with all the progressive and democratic forces in Iran in their struggle for the liberation and emancipation. Solidarity, comrades.
Now we will go to the next speaker, who is Shiva Mahboubi. Shiva Mahboubi is the spokesperson for the Campaign to Free Political Prisoners in Iran, CFPPI. She is herself a former political prisoner at a very young age, and so very familiar with the conditions in the prisons of the Islamic Republic firsthand. And she's been campaigning for years for the freedom of political prisoners and against torture in prisons. And so we are delighted to have Shiva with us today. The mic's yours. Thank you, Shiva.
Thank you so much, Param. Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me here. Well, obviously, many of you have raised very valid points that perhaps I echo those points. And I don't know how many of you have seen the recent hacked videos that basically Bahram mentioned. Just recently, a group of hacktivists hacked some of the security cameras in Evin prison. In the video footage, when you see it, or if you had a chance to see it, you see that how the guards are basically dragging prisoners on the floor. In another footage, you see that how they beating up the prisoners. And so obviously the campaign to free political prisoners have been reporting what's happening in prison and the torture and the treatment of political prisoners. But I think perhaps this is the first time that people around the world virtually entered a prison in Iran and got a glimpse of how the Islamic regime treating political prisoners. And one of these hacked footages is shown that how when they arrested labor activist Sepide Gholian, but what is not captured in this video is how they treated Sepide after the arrest and how they tortured Sepide Gholian, which Sepide has written about it extensively and what happened after that. The footages are only a few examples of what is happening in prison in Iran. The torture of hundreds of thousands of prisoners, that include political prisoners and non-political prisoners, obviously, and their sufferings at the hand of the Islamic regime in Iran have not captured in any camera, in any video. There is no footage from the torture of Sattar Beheshti, who was a worker and a blogger who died as a result of being tortured. There is no footage of the torture the labor activists from Haftape, Ismail Bakhshi, went through. There is no footage of the time when in 2016, 17 workers from Agdarre gold mine were flogged just because they were demanding their rights. So there are millions of examples which it's just impossible to list them here in this limited time. But I would like to use this opportunity and focus on the basically jailed laborers and also the unions. And I would like to use this opportunity to emphasize actually on the important role of union and basically the labor unions and organizations. You see, I mean, from my experience, and I've been active for years and years, the supports and solidarity from the labor unions and organization in the last 42 years have been vital and extremely important to the labor rights activists and also the people in Iran. However, I believe the unions collectively, which I'm sure you agree with me, have the power to mobilize worldwide. And I believe they must use this power. This is the time for the labor unions to use their influence and demand the expulsion of the representative of the Islamic regime from the International Labour Organization, ILO. Just recently, more than 700 rights activists, including labor activists, the former and current political prisoners and their families, they signed a letter and they sent it to the UN Human Rights Council demanding an investigation into the crime against humanity committed by the current president, Ibrahim Raisi. You see, when you look at the situation of Iran, this regime has committed 42 years of crime against workers and workers' rights activists by depriving them of their rights, by harassing them and their family, torturing them, imprisoning them, and even executing them for simply organizing a May Day, for example. The labor unions and organization must demand an investigation into this crime. And I'm wondering what stopped them from doing the same thing, to pressure the UN to investigate this crime. It's time that the labor unions take further action, in my view, and use their power to pressure their governments to politically boycott the Islamic regime in Iran, investigate their crimes, and to hold them accountable, hold the regime accountable for suppressing, torturing, harassing, and imprisoning thousands of labor right activists in Iran. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Shiva. Fantastic. Just say some of the key points Shiva raised in Farsi. And چند نکاتی که شیوا محبوبی سخنگوی کمیته مبارزه برای آزادی زندانی سیاسی گفتن، من خلاصه‌شو خیلی سریع اینجا میگم. گروهی از فعالین اینترنتی اخیراً دوربین‌های مداربسته زندان اوین را هک کردند. در ویدیو مشاهده می‌کنید که نگهبانان یک زندانی را روی زمین می‌کشند و زندانیان را کتک می‌زنند. ما در کمیته مبارزه برای آزادی زندانیان سیاسی بارها گزارشات و اخبار شکنجه زندانیان را منتشر کردیم. اما احتمالاً این اولین بار است که مردم در سراسر دنیا به صورت مجازی وارد یک زندان در ایران شده و می‌بینند زندانیان چگونه شکنجه می‌شوند. یکی از دوربین‌های هک شده دستگیری فعال کارگری سپیده قلیان را نشان می‌دهد. اما چیزی که در این دوربین‌ها ضبط نشده است صحنه‌های ضرب و شتم و شکنجه سپیده پس از دستگیری است. سپیده در این رابطه و اینکه چه اتفاقی افتاد نوشته است. صحنه‌های ضبط شده توسط این دوربین‌ها تنها چند نمونه است. شکنجه صدها هزار زندانی و لحظات زجر کشیدنشان در هیچ دوربینی ضبط نشده است. هیچ دوربینی صحنه شکنجه و جان باختن ستار بهشتی را ضبط نکرده است. هیچ دوربینی شکنجه فعال کارگر اسماعیل بخشی را ضبط نکرده است. هیچ دوربینی صحنه شلاق زدن 17 کارگر معدن طلای آقدره را که جرمشان مبارزه برای حقشان بود ضبط نکرده است. میلیون ها نمونه وجود دارد که در این زمان کوتاه امکان اسم بردن آنها نیست. مایلم از این فرصت استفاده کنم و بر اهمیت نقش اتحادیه‌ها و سازمان‌های کارگری تاکید کنم. حمایت و همبستگی اتحادیه و سازمان‌های کارگری در طول 42 سال اخیر برای فعالین کارگری و مردم ایران حیاتی و بسیار مهم بوده است. اکنون زمان آن فرا رسیده است که اتحادیه‌های کارگری نفوذ و قدرت خود را به کار گرفته و خواهان اخراج نمایندگان جمهوری اسلامی سازمان جهانی کار شوند. اتحادیه‌ها به صورت جمعی قدرت سازماندهی جهانی دارند و باید از این قدرت استفاده کنند. اخیراً بیش از 700 تن از فعالین عرصه‌ها، زندانیان سیاسی سابق و کنونی و خانواده‌هایشان نامه‌ای را امضا و به شورای حقوق بشر سازمان ملل ارسال کردند. خواسته امضا کنندگان این است که جنایات ابراهیم رئیسی، رئیس جمهور کنونی رژیم، تحت رسیدگی قرار بگیرد. رژیم 42 سال است که کارگران را از حقشان محروم کرده، اذیت و آزار، شکنجه، زندان و حتی اعدام کرده است. اتحادیه‌ها و سازمان‌های کارگری باید خواهان رسیدگی به این جنایات شوند. اکنون زمان آن فرا رسیده است که اتحادیه‌ها فراتر قدم برداشته از قدرت خود استفاده کرده و خواهان بایکوت جمهوری اسلامی به خاطر سرکوب، شکنجه و زندان هزاران فعال کارگری شوند. خیلی ممنون از شیوا محبوبی. Thanks Shiva for that. And now we go just to see a clip of something that has happened and the whole world was shocked. Was the return of the Islamic terrorist group Taliban to power in Afghanistan. And this shocked the whole world. And the huge amount of solidarity by the people, heartfelt solidarity and support for the people of Afghanistan, especially the women in Afghanistan, has been expressed, and this is fantastic. And we have seen the protests by women in Afghanistan. It's a different society compared to 20 years ago, and I'm sure the people will give such a hard time to the Taliban, and this society, we will see the growth of people's struggles and the women's struggle to get rid of this another form of the Islamic regime of Iran, which is now ruling over the people of Afghanistan. And so what is heartwarming is the struggle of the people inside Afghanistan, by the women especially, and by this huge solidarity that's being shown by millions of people around the world. And we'll just see a clip of the protests in Afghanistan before we go to our next two speakers.
بخش آسیایی است، از کشورهای منطقه هست که این طیف را قطعا به رسمیت نشناسند، قطعا مشروعیت نبخشند برشان. اصلا این شعارهای دروغین است. پیشتر ما یکی از طالبان نوشتم که از من فاصله بگی که خلاف شریعت است، اصلا قبول نکرد که ما هرگز نمیگم، ما هرگز نمیشه با این را ادامه نشیم. ما صدای چند زن هستیم، ما صدای یک کشور هستیم، ما صدای زنای یک کشور هستیم، هرگز خاموش نمی باشیم. راه ما ادامه داره، هرگز خاموش نیستیم. حق خود میخواهیم، ما حق خود میخواهیم.
Okay, that was fantastic to see that, and those protests also took place by the people, Afghan people in Iran as well. So there were protests both in Afghanistan and by the Afghan community in Iran. So we now go to the next speaker, who is Tami Sadeghi, and Tami is the member of the International Solidarity Committee of QP of British Columbia. QP is the Canadian Union of Public Employees, and she's a tireless activist for workers' rights and for women's rights and for the situation of the people in Iran and internationally. So I'm really delighted to have Tami with us. And Tami, mic's yours.
Hello, everybody, and nice to meet you all. And I'm so happy and glad that you guys invited me for this conference. I've been working since I was 17 in Iran, and I've seen a lot what has happened and what did happen to the workers in Iran. Right now we are talking about striking workers, and I think striking workers more than ever, not just striking workers, all the Iranian workers, more than ever need this international solidarity. Because as we all talk, Iranian regime practices inhuman acts such as imprisonment, torture, heavy fines, closing bank accounts, bribing striker workers, spreading false rumors about activists and labor leaders to create pessimism and division. They have done this from the day one they took power. I remember that. I was working in many factories, and we were going on strikes, and always we were under the danger. Our leaders got arrested, imprisoned, tortured, and etc. And it's happening even after 40 years, all these years. Most of these workers, as you know, they haven't got paid for months, some of them even years. The Iranian regime lowered their living standard under the poverty line. This is according to the Statistical Center of Iran. Iranian workers gained so many rights. We used to work 40 hours a week. They changed it to 40 hours a week. We asked for, free childcare. Many workplaces, the employee had to provide childcare. We had to have, lunches. We had to have free transportation, and so many. But step by step, this regime took back our rights right to healthcare, right to transportation, right? And even our job became, you know, like based on contract rather than permanent. But as we know, Iranian workers never stopped their fight against this regime. They organized themselves in mass, and as you saw in the videos, that they haven't stopped their struggle. And despite the pressure and turmoil they're facing, but they keep going and forcing this government to step back. Our workers are dealing with a regime and a president who is murderous, who ordered mass execution from 1980 to 1986. And as you saw, like in November last year and year before that, there were uprisings. In a week, they killed over 1,500. How brutal this regime. But today I'm happy. International solidarity is growing. Like when I talk to among my co-workers or among my unions, they have limited information what is happening in Iran. And sadly, most of these workers, they ignored the pressure on Iranian workers because they saw Iranian regime as an anti-imperialist regime. I've been in many coalitions. I went to many meetings among leftists, but I was ignored about Iran, about Afghanistan, about Iraq, just because America was interfering in those countries, and they forgot about the people. They closed their mind. They closed their support, just because America had interference, or they recognized the Iranian regime as an anti-imperialist regime. Didn't matter how much crime they did against workers and people. And that happened about Syria too. Same thing with Syria. We saw like Bashar Assad massacred people, killed in mass, but they kept quiet, which is sad. But I feel it is changing, and I'm happy our solidarity gets stronger and stronger. Iranian workers need your support. Without your support, they have no voice, because we are dealing with a fascist regime. They are even shutting down internet to not letting workers to have their voice around the world. Thank you for your solidarity.
Thank you so much for that, Tami Sadeghi. Fantastic. Thank you so much. And now we go to the next speaker, who is Masoud Arjang. And Masoud is the chairperson of Local 803, Community Health Services in Canada, British Columbia General Employees Union, Community Health Services. And again, Masoud has been campaigner for workers' rights in Iran and in Canada and internationally for many years. And we are delighted to have Masoud with us. The mic is yours, Masoud Arjang.
Thank you, Bahram, and thank you to all the participants, great speakers, and thanks to the viewers in Iran and also around the globe. Friends, it has been 42 years of Islamic Republic in Iran, 42 years of tyranny in every aspect of life for Iranian people. From day one of this regime, Iranian workers have faced anti-labor law and have witnessed the crushing of workers' councils and assemblies by Islamic agents. The Islamic Republic made it a priority to go after workers' representatives, threatening workers and their families, expelling them from work. Their names were put on the list to ensure that they would not be hired by other employers. They have been subject to long imprisonment, flogging, execution, and exile. These are the characteristics of Islamic government and the way that they have been treating labor activists in Iran for the past 42 years. Despite all of these atrocities and inhuman conditions, workers in Iran have never been silent. As we all know, everyday strikes and rallies have been taking place in cities and workplaces. The striking of oil workers in the south of Iran is one of the most recent examples. For those of us outside of Iran, building international labor solidarity has been an ongoing task. We at the Freedom Now recognize our allies and friends in the progressive world and in the labor movement around the world. From Sweden to Australia, Canada, Germany, Iraq, and Turkey, our friends and allies stand with the labor movement in Iran, not only to improve collective bargaining rights, but also for equality, prosperity, freedom of Iranian people. To my friends in labor movement around the world, the bells of overthrowing the Islamic regime have been calling us, guiding us to another level of international solidarity with the working class and labor movement in Iran. Expelling and flushing out the agents of Islamic Republic from ILO should be our message to international organizations. It's a clear message. The Islamic regime has no place at ILO or any other labor organizations. This is what it would help the labor movement and the Iranian people in their struggle against the systematic atrocity that continue to be committed by the Islamic Republic of Iran. To my friends and comrades in Iran, we have been watching the situation closely at Freedom Now. We listen to you and have been your voice outside of Iran. Here in Canada, from coast to coast, the labor movement has been informed by our activists through international solidarity committees, resolutions, messages, and meetings with the unions and human rights organizations. We are with you in this fight until the end of the Islamic regime's life. My friends, you can count on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Masud. Fantastic, thank you. Now we have come to the end, well, nearing the end of the conference. And in terms of the speakers present at the conference, we have come to the end there. So we're going to see a video clip, the message by Hassan Salehi, who's the head of the spokesperson for the campaign against executions in Iran. And we will see that clip. And after that, I will read out the speech Sa'id Na'ma was going to give. Unfortunately, our connection could not be established with Sa'id. So can we see the video clip by Hassan Salehi of the International Campaign Against Executions in Iran? Thank you.
با سلام‌های گرم به همه دوستان حاضر در کنفرانس. همبستگی بین‌المللی می‌تواند معجزه بیافریند و سکوت و یا بی‌تفاوتی جهانی می‌تواند به فاجعه منجر شود. من به عنوان سخنگوی کمیته بین‌المللی علیه اعدام بارها این حقیقت را تجربه کردم. اگر حمایت‌های جهانی نمی بود، بسیاری از کسانی که ما برای نجات آنها از اعدام کمپین را انداخته بودیم اکنون در میان ما نمی بودند. حتما شما هم نام سکینه محمدی آشتیانی، یعنی زنی که به سنگسار در ایران محکوم شد، را به خاطر دارید. او امروز زنده است دقیقاً به این خاطر که جهان در حمایت از او به حرکت درآمد و به اعتبار این موازی جهانی سنگسار در ایران عملاً لغو شد. یک مانع جدی در مقابل مردم ایران برای اینکه به آزادی و عدالت برسند وجود رژیم جمهوری اسلامی است که هم دشمن آزادی است و هم باعث نابرابری‌های اجتماعی و شکاف‌های عظیم طبقاتی در جامعه است. حربه این حکومت در مقابل کارگران و مردم سرکوب و دستگیری، به گلوله بستن معترضین در خیابان، شکنجه و اعدام است. برای من که با مسئله اعدام ها در ایران کار می کنم، میزان اعدام ها در ایران به شدت نگران کننده است. صدور احکام اعدام با دادرسی های غیرعادلانه توأم است که این به نوبه خود ضد انسانی بودن رفتار حکومت را بیشتر عیان می کند. از همه سازمان های کارگری و نهادهای حقوق بشری در جهان تقاضا دارم که نسبت به این مسئله بی‌تفاوت نباشند و ما را در متوقف کردن اعدام ها در ایران یاری برسانند. البته باید بگویم که تاکنون شماری از اتحادیه های کارگری از خواست لغو مجازات اعدام در ایران حمایت کردند. بدون شک هر اقدام اعتراضی شما میتواند باعث نجات جانی در ایران شود. متشکرم.
Great. Thanks for that, Hassan Salehi, from the campaign against executions in Iran. And now I will just read out a short speech Sa'id Na'ma was going to give. He had kindly sent us the text of his speech. Sa'id Na'ma is the president of the General Federation of Trade Unions and Employees of Iraq, and a tireless fighter for workers' rights in Iraq. Here is his short speech in English translation. Comrades, good evening. It's a great pleasure to participate in this conference. Our workers suffer violations, arrests, hunger, and deprivation. And this is not only in Iraq, but in most of the countries of the region. Governments violate the rights of workers and take their freedoms and treat them as slaves. They persecute the activists and put them in jail. Friends, what is happening in the oil sector to strikers and violations and arrests in Iraq is worse than what is happening, what is going on in Iran, especially in the oil sector. Therefore, we all have to stand with the workers of Iraq and the workers of Iran and demand that the International Labour Organization, ILO, take measures to protect workers from them and to put those governments on the blacklist. The international community must be called upon to boycott these governments. I reiterate my thanks and appreciation for your invitation to participate in this conference, wishing it success and the workers of Iran progress in achieving their demands and rights. Sa'id Na'ma, President of General Federation of Trade Unions and Employees of Iraq. And we thank Sa'id Na'ma for that contribution. And we have come to the end of the conference. I would like to thank the speakers who spoke at this conference, and for those of you who sent the video messages to the conference. I would like to thank you, the viewers of this conference, International Solidarity with the Oil Workers in Iran against the repression and in support of the struggle of the people of Iran. And also I'd like to thank the organizers of this conference, Freedom Now, and specifically Shehla Dانشفر and Kaaظم نیکخواه. I would like to also send my thanks to those who made this technically possible, this conference, Kian Azar and Meysam Atiq, who worked tirelessly to make sure that this conference runs without any problems. And thanks again for all of you that took part in this fantastic conference, and we'd like to have more conferences like this, and we ask you to keep a lookout for these events. Thank you. Good night.